So I know I'm all focused on Harry and Meghan in Australia, as we all should be, yay. But something came up yesterday about the Sentebale situation, and I felt that it had to be addressed. And I also wondered about the deliberate timing of this particular bit of information, because I think that it could be probably maybe one of the most significant details to have come out about Sentebale this week. So essentially, a resignation letter that was written by the former board of trustees of Sentebale has been made public for the first time. This letter was sent in March 2025 when Harry, Prince Ciso, and the entire board resigned in protest at Miss Mam's leadership of the charity. At the time of their departure, the trustees, they didn't provide a detailed explanation. They literally just resigned and kept a dignified silence. The public, as you can imagine, was told very little about what had actually happened within the organization. And the narrative that filled that vacuum was largely constructed by Miss Mam herself, because as you know, the trustees, they kept stum, but Miss Mam decided to go on a press tour. And she alleged bullying at scale, and she alleged many things. She talked about, there were many things she said. She dragged in Harry, dragged in Meghan, dragged in Serena. Again, just went for the salt earth approach. And the narrative, of her, of what she did, when she went around and she said her bit, all that is now sitting very nicely next to the resignation letter. And the two versions look really different. So her version is looking one way. The resignation letter, which is written and documented, is looking another way. So the trustees, they wrote that they had unanimously decided to resign after raising significant concerns about Miss Mam's conduct over many months. They described this as not a sudden decision. So it wasn't something that they suddenly decided to do, but it was one they reached after sustained difficulties. Note the language, please. Very important. They alleged a breakdown in relationship with trustees, staff, and major funders. So basically, there was a breakdown in relationship either between her and staff, trustees, and major funders. Interesting. They accused her, and this is very, very important, they accused her of attempting to manipulate board minutes. They said her tenure had an adverse effect on the charity. They're not wrong. They're not wrong. Let me stay on that last point, because the trustees are not just saying that they disagreed with her direction or her style or her priorities, because disagreements do arise. Some people might think, well, this is the direction we should be going. Somebody else might think, oh, it should be the other way. But what you do, you say, okay, what is best for the charity? Make your cases and let's see if we can vote on it. Make your case, or let's see how we can prioritize. I don't know if none of that happened, but that is what normally happens anyway. So what they are specifically alleging when it comes to Miss Mam is that she attempted to manipulate the formal records of board meetings. My question is, and I always ask these questions, how do they know that she made this attempt? And I'm assuming that for them to say she attempted to manipulate board minutes, there has to be something in writing. And I hope to God that people have it in writing. I hope to God that they preserved the chain of custody. when it comes to emails, documents, and other matters. Yes. Interesting. And this is why, remember, you see, when I say these things, when I do my videos, right, I remember somebody scoffing at me when I said emails have to be digitally and forensically examined. You need a digital forensic expert to make sure that the emails that are being presented are the true emails, number one, that they're being presented in the right order, that dates and information have not been tampered with, and a digital expert, right, is able to do that. There is something called a digital forensic expert. Yes, they do exist, because us human beings, we are something else. Sometimes we let a bit of power get into our heads. But anyway, let me move on from this, because, I think for me, when it comes to board minutes, right, they are the official legal documentation of what was decided and who said what when it comes to governance meetings. Because when they talk about governance, this is it, right? You need that paper trail. In such and such meeting, this is what was said, this is who said it, and these are the actions that are agreed on, this is what we decided, blah, 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 blah. Everything is in those minutes. And this is the basis on which accountability is maintained. And this is the basis against which you reviewed decisions. So if you have another meeting and you make another decision, you go, hang on, let's go back to the previous meeting to make sure that this decision is in alignment with what we decided last time. And the minutes from the last time will actually determine whether you did or didn't do the actions that were assigned against your name. So it is legal and it is very formal. So when you therefore have an allegation that a chair attempted to manipulate those documents, that is a very serious allegation. And it's actually an allegation about the integrity of the governance process itself. Now, considering that this person was the one that ran to the Charity Commission to complain about governance issues, I rest my case. However, there is more. Oh, there's always more. There's always more. When the board asked Miss Ma'am to step down, she responded, according to the letter, by making vague and deeply troubling allegations to threaten and intimidate the board, to threaten and intimidate the patrons, and to threaten and intimidate a donor. And then when the trustees moved to call a board meeting at which her position would be voted on. So they said, okay, we call a board meeting, we're going to vote on whether we should kick her out or whatever. She then sought a high court injunction to block that meeting from taking place. A high court injunction to prevent her own board from voting on her continued tenure. You need to think about that. And the trustees' response is, to that is worth quoting directly, because it is very precise and it is very damning. So the trustees said that there can be no more damning evidence of your failure to act as a leader capable of putting the charity's best interests first. So for you to do all this and to block them from voting you out, why do you want to hang on to that position so badly, considering it's not paid? And they said this attack from within threatens to destroy Sentebale for good. Many have said maybe that was her mission from the get-go. I do not know. I'm just merely repeating what the press is saying and what many online are saying. But destroying this from within, woof, I don't think it was on anybody's bingo card last year. But the point is that the trustees identified the threat to Sentebale from coming from within, from the conduct of the person who remained in post after they all left. And they warned explicitly that the situation had become untenable and that the charity faced irreparable damage if it continued. And they were right. I mean, they said that a year ago, and they are right, because, again, according to Sentebale on their website, they identify one of the main threats to the charity as one of reputation damage. And I thought, hello? Who started all this? Who went down that route? It certainly wasn't Harry, it wasn't Prince Ciso, and it wasn't the rest of the trustees, according to what reports are saying. So, I don't know, maybe there's somebody, who might that be? And we do know that even the Charity Commission has said, hang on, why didn't you come to us for formal advice? But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, please, because all I know is that this is going to run and run. And unfortunately, like somebody said yesterday, everyone's going to lose. Everyone is going to lose. But anyway, I'll keep praying and thinking of those poor children who have now been deprived of incredible patrons who were raising money, who were doing incredible work in bringing attention to Sentebale, the trustees who held it down for at least 19 years. And yeah, we have one other person who has decided that she will have her way. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, please. My name's Elizabeth. I'm the author of The Luxpreneur. And for more insights like these, please like, share, comment, and follow me. And to support my work in holding truth to power, please make sure that when you subscribe, when you hit the subscribe button, you are subscribing to my only YouTube channel, which is Elizabeth Solaru 4970. And you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Elizabeth Solaru, or you can get a copy of my book, The Luxpreneur, from Amazon, Waterstones, or Barnes and Noble.
The contrasting accounts when official records challenge public narratives. A resignation letter written by the former board of trustees of Sentebale has been made public for the first time, and it presents a starkly different account of events than the narrative that dominated public discourse following their departure in March 2025. When Harry, Prince Ciso, and the entire board resigned in protest at Sophie Chandauka's leadership, their departure was announced with minimal explanation, leaving a void that Chandauka herself moved quickly to fill through Sky News appearances and subsequent media interactions. The resignation letter, however, tells a fundamentally different story, one of unanimous board concern regarding Chandauka's conduct accumulated over many months, not a sudden disagreement, but a decision reached after sustained difficulties. The trustees documented what they characterized as a breakdown in relationships with trustees, staff, and major funders, and made the particularly serious allegation that Chandauka had attempted to manipulate board minutes, the official legal documentation upon which governance accountability rests. Beyond these governance concerns, the letter describes how Chandauka responded to requests for her to step down by making vague and deeply troubling allegations intended to threaten and intimidate the board, its patrons and a donor, and subsequently sought a High Court injunction to prevent the board from voting on her continued tenure. The trustees' assessment was unambiguous. This attack from within threatened to destroy Sentebale entirely. Yet the public narrative constructed during the same period presented a dramatically opposed version of events, with Chandauka characterizing Harry's involvement as harassment and bullying at scale, suggesting his brand toxicity had hindered the charity's ability to attract support. Now, as discovery processes in legal proceedings unfold and documents face examination under the obligations of High Court disclosure, the question of whose account proves accurate will be tested not in press releases or media interviews, but in the formal evidentiary record where the archive itself begins to speak. The resignation letter emerges. In March 2025, the Board of Trustees of Sentebale made a unanimous decision to resign, but not impulsively and not without cause. Their departure came after months of raising significant concerns about Sophie Chandauka's leadership, concerns that had accumulated into a formal resignation letter that documented sustained difficulties with her conduct. The letter remained private, however, creating a vacuum in the public understanding of what had actually transpired within the organization. Into that void stepped Chandauka herself, who constructed a narrative through her Sky News appearances and subsequent media interactions that would come to dominate the public discourse. Now, with the trustees' resignation letter finally made public, the two accounts sit side by side, and they tell starkly different stories. Where Chandauka presented herself as a leader under siege, bullied and harassed by Prince Harry, the trustees' letter describes a chair who allegedly manipulated board minutes, attempted to intimidate the board through vague and troubling allegations, and even sought a High Court injunction to prevent her own removal from being voted upon. The contrast is not merely a matter of perspective or emphasis. It is a fundamental contradiction between the narrative that filled the silence and the documented account of those who were there when the decisions were made. Allegations against Sophie Chandauka. The trustees' account presents a starkly different picture from the narrative Chandauka would later construct. They alleged that she had attempted to manipulate board meeting minutes and official records, documents that serve as the legal foundation for governance accountability and decision-making. Beyond this assault on the integrity of the organization's own processes, the trustees documented an alleged breakdown in relationships across every critical dimension of the charity, with trustees themselves, with staff members, and crucially, with major funders whose support Sentebale depends upon. Perhaps most troublingly, when confronted with calls for her resignation, Chandauka responded, according to the letter, by making vague and deeply troubling allegations designed to threaten and intimidate board members and the organization's donors. These were not reasoned counter-arguments or substantive defenses of her leadership. They were, the trustees alleged, deliberate attempts at coercion, tactics deployed to silence criticism and obstruct accountability. It is this pattern of alleged behavior, the manipulation of records, the systematic fracturing of relationships, and the resort to intimidation when challenged, that forms the substance of the trustees' concerns and sets the stage for understanding the dramatic events that followed. The governance crisis. When the board moved to convene a meeting to vote on Chandauka's continued tenure, her response was strikingly direct. She sought a High Court injunction to block the vote from taking place. It was an extraordinary move, a chair attempting to use the courts to prevent her own board from holding her to account. The trustees' characterization of this action was unsparing. In their letter, they wrote that there could be no more damning evidence of your failure to act as a leader capable of putting the charity's best interests first. They went further still, describing her conduct as constituting an attack from within that threatens to destroy Sentebale for good. The language was precise and deliberate. These were not men and women expressing mere disagreement or stylistic differences. They were documenting what they believed to be a fundamental breach of fiduciary duty. The trustees warned explicitly that the situation had become untenable and that the charity now faced irreparable damage if her leadership continued unchecked. Their departure, they made clear, was not a sudden rupture, but the culmination of sustained concerns about her willingness to place the organization's welfare above her own position. Chandauka's public narrative. When the vacuum of explanation opened up around the board's departure, Chandauka moved swiftly to fill it. She appeared on Sky News and constructed a narrative that was sharp, simple, and devastating. Harry's handling of his resignation, she claimed, amounted to harassment and bullying at scale. In subsequent interviews, she refined this further, identifying the number one risk facing the organization not as any internal governance failure, but as the toxicity of the lead patron's brand itself, suggesting that Harry's public profile had actively hindered the charity's ability to attract both staff and donors. Harry's brand is toxic. Harry was bullying. Harry was the problem. This framing proved remarkably durable. It migrated from the broadcast studio into the pages of a book by Tom Bauer, which was then serialized in The Times and finally crystallized into the formal structure of a lawsuit claiming that Harry had orchestrated a coordinated adverse media campaign designed to damage the charity. Each iteration gave the narrative fresh momentum. Each retelling amplified what had come before, until the account constructed by Chandauka in those early television appearances had hardened into legal allegation and entered the machinery of the courts themselves. The lawsuit and its competing narratives. The defamation lawsuit filed against Harry alleges that he orchestrated a coordinated adverse media campaign designed to damage the charity's reputation and standing. This legal action, brought by Sentebale under Chandauka's leadership, represents a dramatic escalation from the public disputes that had already consumed the organization. Yet, as the lawsuit proceeds through the courts, the Charity Commission has begun scrutinizing its very foundation, asking a fundamental question. How does this legal action further the charity's stated purposes of providing healthcare and support in Lesotho and Botswana? The inquiry touches on something deeply uncomfortable. Whether resources meant for vulnerable populations are instead being directed toward internal disputes and litigation. Adding another layer of concern to the proceedings is the revelation that the law firm representing Sentebale in this matter previously represented the Post Office during the Horizon scandal, a case that has come to symbolize institutional overreach, the suppression of evidence, and the pursuit of litigation against individuals later found to have been wronged. That history casts a particular shadow over the current proceedings, raising questions about institutional accountability and the wisdom of the legal strategies being pursued. The lawsuit's claims about Harry's coordinated campaign now sit uncomfortably alongside the trustees' assertion that the true threat to Sentebale came from within, from the conduct of the person who remained in post after they all departed. Discovery in a defamation case will force both narratives into the light, where documents, communications and timelines will be examined under the obligations of legal disclosure in the High Court. The diverging narratives of Sentebale's crisis. The resignation letter and Chandauka's subsequent public statements present two fundamentally irreconcilable accounts of what transpired within Sentebale. The trustees, in their formal resignation, identified the threat to the organization as emanating from within its own leadership, specifically from Chandauka's conduct as chair. They detailed a pattern of governance failures. The alleged manipulation of board minutes, the issuing of vague and intimidating allegations designed to threaten board members and donors, and ultimately the seeking of a High Court injunction to prevent her own board from voting on her position. Yet Chandauka constructed an entirely different narrative when she took to the airwaves. She blamed Harry's brand toxicity for the charity's difficulties, suggesting that his public profile had become a liability that hindered the organisation's ability to attract staff and supporters. She characterised his handling of his departure as harassment and bullying at scale. Where the trustees pointed inward to failures of leadership and governance, Chandauka pointed outward toward the figure of the lead patron. These are not merely different interpretations of shared events, they are fundamentally different explanations for the crisis itself. One narrative suggests institutional breakdown caused by those in power. The other suggests institutional damage caused by external forces. The weight of evidence, as documented in the trustees' letter, would suggest that the crisis originated not from without, but from within. When evidence meets the court. The defamation case discovery process will demand extensive document disclosure and examination of the sort that no press release can circumvent. Every communication, every email, every message will be subjected to scrutiny under High Court obligations that permit no convenient omissions or carefully curated narratives. The timelines of events will be reconstructed with forensic precision, stripping away the interpretations and selective framing that have characterized the public discourse thus far. And crucially, the truth of these competing accounts, Chandauka's assertion of toxic branding and bullying against Harry, set squarely against the trustees' letter describing manipulation of board minutes and threats deployed to prevent her own removal, will be tested through legal process rather than through press releases, Sky News interviews, or serialized book extracts. In the High Court, where obligations of disclosure are absolute and evasion is impossible, the question of whose version of events actually occurred will be answered not by who spoke to journalists first or loudest, but by the documentary record itself. The archive, as it turns out, has a way of speaking more clearly than any carefully constructed narrative ever could.